Marcus Thompson adjusted his red ceremonial uniform one final time before stepping through the gates of Buckingham Palace. The heavy fabric felt strange against his skin after years of tactical gear and camouflage. At 35, he was starting fresh as a member of the Queen's Guard, a position that seemed worlds away from his previous life in the Special Air Service. The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace courtyard as Marcus took his post. Tourists were already gathering, cameras ready to capture the stoic guards in their iconic bearskin hats. He had practiced the expressionless face required for the job, but, inside, his mind wandered to memories of Afghanistan, Syria, and countless classified operations where showing any emotion could mean death. "Thompson," Sergeant Williams called out during the changing of the guard. "You're settling in well. How are you finding civilian life?" Marcus nodded respectfully. "Different, Sergeant. But I'm adapting." What Sergeant Williams didn't know was that Marcus had been handpicked for this position after a distinguished 12-year career in the SAS. His file was marked with enough classified stamps to paper a wall, and his sniper record was something that would never be discussed in polite company. The transition from elite special forces to ceremonial duty was part of a larger plan, one that involved providing discreet protection while maintaining the appearance of tradition. The weeks passed slowly. Marcus found the routine of palace duties almost meditative compared to the constant alertness required in combat zones. Stand at attention, march in formation, ignore the tourists who tried to make him laugh or react. It was simple, predictable work that gave his mind time to process years of experiences he couldn't share with anyone. Other guards often gathered in the break room to discuss their weekend plans or complain about sore feet from standing for hours. Marcus listened politely, but rarely contributed. He had learned long ago that the less people knew about him, the safer everyone remained. "You're quiet, Thompson," remarked Guard James Morrison during lunch break. "What did you do before this?" "Military. Some service," Marcus replied simply, taking a bite of his sandwich. "Nothing special." Morrison laughed. "Come on, mate. We're all former military here. Infantry, Navy. You've got that special forces look about you." Marcus just smiled and changed the subject. The truth was far more complex than Morrison could imagine. Marcus had spent 3 years as a sniper instructor at Hereford, training the next generation of SAS operatives. Before that, he had completed over 40 successful missions across 4 continents, earning decorations that were locked away in files most people would never see. The decision to leave the SAS hadn't been easy. After losing his partner in an operation gone wrong in Yemen, Marcus found himself questioning everything. The nightmares came regularly, and the weight of constant life-or-death decisions was taking its toll. When his commanding officer suggested a transfer to Royal Protection Services, it seemed like a chance for a different kind of service to his country. 3 months into his palace duty, Marcus had established a routine. Morning parade, tourists, lunch break, afternoon shift, evening debriefing. The work was honorable, and he took pride in maintaining the traditions that meant so much to the British people. But part of him missed the challenge, the adrenaline, and, yes, even the danger of his former life. On a particularly busy Saturday, Marcus noticed something unusual. A man in the crowd had been photographing the guards for over an hour, but his focus wasn't on the ceremony. His camera was directed at the palace windows, the security positions, and the rotation patterns. Marcus filed the information away mentally, a habit from his SAS training that never left him. During break, Marcus mentioned his observation to Sergeant Williams. "Probably just an enthusiast," Williams replied. "We get all types. Historians, photographers, tourists who think they're spy novelists." But Marcus's instincts, honed by years of survival in hostile territories, suggested something different. He made a mental note to watch for the man again. The following week, several guards were discussing plans for their monthly shooting competition at a local range. It was a tradition among the Queen's Guard to maintain their marksmanship skills, though it was treated more as social activity than serious training. "Thompson, you joining us this weekend?" asked Morrison. "It's good fun. We usually grab dinner afterward." Marcus hesitated. He had been avoiding situations that might reveal his true capabilities, but isolation wasn't healthy either. "Sure," he said finally. "Could be interesting." What Marcus didn't anticipate was how differently civilian shooting sports would feel after years of combat precision. The targets seemed impossibly large, the distances laughably short. He would need to be very careful not to draw attention to skills that were supposed to be buried in classified files. Friday evening arrived, and Marcus found himself driving to the shooting range with 5 other guards. The conversation was light, focused on weekend plans, and complaints about tourist behavior. Morrison was boasting about his accuracy with the standard-issue rifle, claiming he had been the best shot in his infantry unit. "What about you, Thompson?" Morrison asked. "Any shooting experience?" "Some basic training," Marcus replied. "Nothing fancy." The shooting range was busier than expected. Several groups of off-duty police officers were practicing alongside civilian gun enthusiasts and competitive shooters. The atmosphere was relaxed, friendly, with people sharing tips and comparing equipment. Marcus signed in and was handed safety equipment. The familiar weight of ear protection and safety glasses brought back thousands of memories. He selected a basic rifle from the range's collection, something simple and civilian-appropriate that wouldn't suggest any specialized training. "Right then," said Sergeant Williams, taking charge of the group. "Let's see what we've got. Morrison, you're up first." Morrison stepped up to the firing line with obvious confidence. He took his time setting up, adjusting his stance and grip like he had seen in movies. His first shot was decent, hitting the target near the center. The next 4 were scattered across the scoring rings, but respectable for recreational shooting. "Not bad," Williams commented. "Your turn, Davies." Guard after guard took their turn. Some were clearly experienced, others struggled with basic accuracy. Marcus watched carefully, noting their techniques, and quietly calculating what scores would seem appropriate for someone with basic training. The other shooters at the range had noticed the group of off-duty guards and were paying attention. A few made friendly comments about the difficulty of shooting after standing at attention all day. Others seemed less impressed with the guard's performance. "Your turn, Thompson," Williams called out. Marcus approached the firing line, feeling dozens of eyes on him. This was the moment he had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. He could either maintain his cover by shooting like a weekend hobbyist, or risk exposure by displaying even a fraction of his real abilities. He picked up the rifle and began checking it over, a routine so automatic he had to force himself to slow down. To the watching guards, it looked like a careful beginner's inspection. To Marcus, the weapon's condition, balance, and characteristics were assessed in seconds. The first shot was deliberately placed slightly off-center, earning a respectable but not exceptional score. The second was closer to the bullseye, suggesting improvement with practice. By the 5th shot, Marcus had created a grouping that looked like a decent recreational shooter having a good day. "Nice shooting, Thompson," Morrison said with surprise. "Better than you let on." Marcus just shrugged, but he noticed something troubling. One of the civilian shooters, a man in his 50s with military bearing, was watching him with unusual interest. The man's eyes weren't looking at the target or the scores, but at Marcus's stance, his breathing, and the subtle signs of advanced training that were impossible to completely hide. As the guards prepared to leave, the older man approached. "Excuse me," he said to Marcus. "Mind if I ask about your background? You've got some interesting habits there." Marcus felt his pulse quicken slightly, but his expression remained neutral. "Just picked up a few things over the years," he replied casually. The man studied him for a moment longer, then smiled. "Fair enough. Enjoy your evening." As they walked to their cars, Morrison was still talking about the shooting. "We should do this more often. Thompson's a natural. Maybe we can enter a team competition." Marcus forced a smile while his mind raced. The encounter with the older shooter had been brief, but something about the man's questions and observation skills suggested military intelligence background. Had he recognized something in Marcus's technique? Was his cover already compromised? The drive back to London was filled with casual conversation, but Marcus remained alert. He had spent years developing the ability to appear relaxed while maintaining constant awareness of potential threats. Tonight felt different somehow, like the first crack in a carefully constructed facade. Back in his small flat near the palace, Marcus sat in darkness looking out at the London skyline. He had left the SAS seeking peace and anonymity, but old habits died hard. The shooting range had awakened something in him, a precision and focus that felt like coming home after a long journey. He thought about the mysterious photographer from the previous week and the observant shooter from tonight. Were they connected? Was he being paranoid, or were his instincts trying to tell him something important? Marcus had learned to trust those instincts. They had kept him alive through situations where hesitation meant death. Tomorrow, he would quietly make some inquiries about both men. Tonight, he would plan what to do if his carefully constructed new life was about to become complicated. The transition from special forces to civilian life was supposed to be simple. Stand guard, follow protocol, blend in with the other former soldiers serving their country in a different way. But, as Marcus closed his eyes, he wondered if his past was finished with him, or if it was just beginning to catch up. The following Monday brought an unexpected visitor to the palace. Marcus was standing his regular post when Sergeant Williams approached during the midday changeover, his expression more serious than usual. "Thompson, you're wanted in the security office." Now, Marcus maintained his composure as they walked through the palace corridors, but his mind was already running through possibilities. Had someone made inquiries about his background? Was this about the shooting range incident? His years in the SAS had taught him that unexpected summons rarely brought good news. The security office was located in a part of the palace tourists never saw. Behind the ceremonial facade lay a sophisticated network of surveillance, communications, and protection systems that most people couldn't imagine. Marcus had been briefed on the basics when he joined the guard, but he suspected there were layers of security he hadn't been told about. Inside the office, a woman in an expensive suit was waiting with two men in dark clothing who had the unmistakable bearing of intelligence operatives. Marcus recognized the type immediately. He had worked with similar teams during joint operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. "Guard Thompson," the woman said, standing to greet him. "I'm Sarah Mitchell from the Palace Security Coordination Office. Please, sit down." Marcus remained at attention. "Is there a problem, ma'am?" "Not a problem exactly. More of a situation that requires your particular expertise." She gestured to a chair. "Please, this conversation is going to be somewhat unconventional." Marcus sat, his training keeping his expression neutral while his mind raced. The Palace Security Coordination Office wasn't a department he had heard of during orientation. That usually meant intelligence services operating under diplomatic cover. "We know about your background, Thompson," Mitchell continued. "Your real background. 12 years SAS, specializing in long-range reconnaissance and precision elimination. 3 tours in Afghanistan, 2 in Iraq, classified operations in Syria, Yemen, and Somalia. Instructor qualification at Hereford. Psychological evaluation following the loss of your partner in Operation Sandstone." Marcus felt his jaw tighten slightly at the mention of Yemen, but he said nothing. If they knew about Sandstone, they had access to files that were buried deeper than most government officials could reach. "Your cover as a regular guard has been excellent," Mitchell continued. "But we've been monitoring some concerning activity around the palace, and we need someone with your skills and position." One of the men opened a laptop and turned it toward Marcus. "Recognize this person?" The screen showed a photograph of the man who had been taking pictures the previous week, the one Marcus had reported to Sergeant Williams. But this wasn't a tourist photo. This was a professional surveillance image taken with high-end equipment. "Subject has been conducting reconnaissance of the palace for 3 weeks, the second man explained. "He's using sophisticated counter-surveillance techniques and has connections to a group we've been tracking for 6 months. Marcus studied the image. "What kind of group?" "Former military contractors with grievances against the government," Mitchell replied. "The kind of people who might see disrupting royal security as a way to make a statement. We've intercepted communications suggesting they're planning something during the upcoming state visit next month." The state visit. Marcus knew about it from briefings, a major event with multiple world leaders attending. The security challenges would be enormous under normal circumstances. With a potential threat from trained operatives, the situation became exponentially more complex. "Where do I fit in?" Marcus asked. "You maintain your current position as a guard," Mitchell explained. "But you'll also be providing overwatch during high-risk periods. We need someone who can identify threats that regular security might miss, and who has the skills to respond if necessary." Overwatch. Marcus couldn't keep the surprise out of his voice entirely. They were asking him to resume his sniper role while maintaining his cover as a ceremonial guard. "The palace has several concealed positions that provide excellent sight lines," one of the men explained. "Positions that require someone with your level of training to utilize effectively. During the state visit, you'll rotate between regular guard duties and providing security overwatch." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. He had come to the guards seeking peace from the world of lethal force and life-or-death decisions. Now that world was finding him anyway. "What about the other guards?" he asked. "They can't know. Sergeant Williams has been briefed to the extent necessary," Mitchell replied. "As far as everyone else knows, you're occasionally assigned to special security details. Nothing more." "And if I refuse?" Mitchell's expression didn't change. "Then, we'll respect your decision and find another way to handle the situation. But, Thompson, we chose you because you're already in position and you're the best at what you do. The threat is real, and the consequences of failure could be catastrophic." Marcus thought about his partner who had died in Yemen, about all the operations where split-second decisions had saved lives or prevented disasters. He thought about the tourists who smiled and waved at him every day, trusting that the ceremonial guards represented safety and tradition. "When do I start?" The next few weeks were a careful balance of maintaining his cover while preparing for a very different kind of mission. During regular guard duties, Marcus continued to stand at attention and march in formation like any other guard. But during breaks and off-duty hours, he was studying updated threat assessments, memorizing the faces of suspected operatives, and familiarizing himself with the palace's hidden security infrastructure. The shooting range visits continued with the other guards, but now Marcus had to be even more careful about concealing his abilities. Morrison and the others had accepted him as a decent recreational shooter, and he couldn't afford to shatter that perception with any display of advanced skills. On their third visit to the range, Marcus noticed the older man who had questioned him was there again. This time, the man was shooting with remarkable precision, placing shot after shot in tight groupings that suggested serious training. During a break, Morrison nodded toward the older shooter. "That's Colonel Hartwell," he said quietly. "Retired Royal Marines. Comes here most weekends. Bit of a legend, from what I hear." Marcus watched Hartwell reload with smooth efficiency. The man's technique was flawless, and Marcus recognized several advanced methods that weren't taught in standard military marksmanship courses. This was someone who had received specialized training, possibly at the same level as SAS snipers. As if sensing his attention, Hartwell looked over and nodded slightly. After finishing his session, the older man approached the group of guards. "Enjoying yourselves, gentlemen?" Hartwell asked pleasantly. "Yes, sir," Morrison replied, clearly intimidated by the man's reputation. "Just keeping our skills sharp." Hartwell's eyes settled on Marcus. "How about you, Thompson? Finding the civilian shooting different from military training?" The question was casual, but Marcus caught the subtle emphasis on military training. "Different targets, different pressures," he replied carefully. "Indeed," Hartwell smiled. "Perhaps we could shoot together sometime. Compare techniques." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. The invitation seemed friendly enough, but something in Hartwell's tone suggested he knew more than he was letting on. Back at the palace, Marcus made discreet inquiries about Colonel Hartwell. The official records showed a distinguished career in the Royal Marines, including several classified assignments that overlapped with time periods when Marcus had been operating in the same regions. More concerning was what the records didn't show. There were gaps in Hartwell's service history, periods where his activities were listed simply as liaison duties or special assignment. In Marcus's experience, that usually meant intelligence work or operations that were too sensitive for normal documentation. As the state visit approached, security preparations intensified. Marcus found himself spending more time in the hidden observation posts, learning the sight lines and communication protocols that would be essential if threats materialized. The positions were expertly designed, offering clear views of approach routes while remaining completely invisible to anyone on the ground. During one of these preparation sessions, Mitchell briefed him on the latest intelligence. "We've identified 3 more suspects connected to our original target," she explained, showing him photographs. "All former military, all with legitimate grievances against government policies. They're smart enough to avoid direct electronic surveillance, but we know they're planning something." Marcus studied the faces, memorizing features, and noting details that might help him identify them in a crowd. "Any indication of their specific plans?" "Fragmented communications suggest they want to send a message during the state visit," Mitchell replied. "Could be anything from a protest disruption to something more serious. We can't take chances." The weight of responsibility was familiar to Marcus, but different in this context. In the SAS, his mission parameters were usually clear: eliminate specific targets or secure specific objectives. This assignment was more ambiguous, requiring him to watch and wait while normal life continued around him. 3 days before the state visit, Marcus was standing his regular post when he spotted a familiar face in the crowd of tourists. It was one of the suspects from Mitchell's photographs, casually taking pictures like any other visitor. The man was being careful not to focus too long on any security features, but Marcus's trained eye caught the subtle signs of reconnaissance. Following protocol, Marcus used a discreet hand signal to alert other security personnel, then continued his post as if nothing had happened. Within minutes, plainclothes officers had blended into the crowd to maintain surveillance on the suspect. That evening, Marcus was called to another briefing. The surveillance had paid off. They had followed the suspect to a meeting with 2 other members of the group. Electronic surveillance had captured enough conversation to confirm that something was planned for the state visit's opening ceremony. They're professionals, Mitchell warned. Military trained, using proper operational security, and they know how our systems work. This isn't going to be a simple arrest situation. Marcus nodded, understanding the implications. If these men were smart enough to avoid detection until now, they would have contingency plans and escape routes. They might also have inside information about palace security procedures. There's something else, Mitchell continued. We've had indications that they might have someone feeding them information. Someone with legitimate access to security briefings. The possibility of an insider threat changed everything. It meant their own communications might be compromised, and traditional security responses might be anticipated and countered. Who has access to the briefings? Marcus asked. More people than we'd like, Mitchell admitted. Palace security, metropolitan police, military liaisons, and various government departments. We're working to narrow it down, but, for now, we have to assume they know more than we're comfortable with. As Marcus walked back to his quarters that night, he felt the familiar weight of impending action. The state visit would begin in 3 days, bringing world leaders and thousands of spectators to the palace. Somewhere in that crowd would be trained operatives with unknown intentions and possibly inside information. He thought about Colonel Hartwell's invitation to shoot together and wondered if that was coincidence or something more calculated. He thought about the suspect photographing the palace and whether there were others he hadn't spotted yet. Most of all, he thought about the transition from special forces to civilian life that had seemed so final just months ago. Tomorrow would bring another day of ceremonial duties and tourist photos. But Marcus knew that beneath the surface, a very different kind of operation was beginning. The day before the state visit, Marcus received an unexpected phone call during his lunch break. The voice on the other end was friendly, almost casual. Thompson, this is Colonel Hartwell. We met at the shooting range. I was wondering if you might be free for a drink this evening. There's a pub near the range, the King's Arms. Say 8 o'clock. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. This could be innocent, a retired officer wanting to socialize with fellow military personnel. Or it could be something else entirely. That sounds fine, Colonel. See you at 8. After ending the call, Marcus immediately contacted Mitchell through the secure communication system they had established. The response came back within minutes. Proceed with the meeting, but maintain full surveillance support. That evening, Marcus arrived at the King's Arms 15 minutes early, giving him time to assess the location and identify potential escape routes. The pub was typical of London establishments: dark wood, brass fittings, and the kind of atmosphere that encouraged quiet conversation. Perfect for either friendly drinks or clandestine meetings. Hartwell arrived precisely at 8, ordering a pint and gesturing for Marcus to join him at a corner table away from other patrons. Glad you could make it, Hartwell said, settling into his chair. I've been hoping to have a proper conversation with you since that first day at the range. About what, sir? Hartwell smiled and took a sip of his beer. About why someone with your obvious training is pretending to be an average weekend shooter. About why the Palace Security Coordination Office has been asking questions about you. About what's really happening tomorrow. Marcus kept his expression neutral, but his mind was racing. If Hartwell knew about Mitchell's department, he was far more connected than his retired status suggested. I'm not sure I follow, Marcus replied carefully. Thompson, I spent 30 years in intelligence work, Hartwell said quietly. The last 5 coordinating security for exactly the kind of events happening tomorrow. I recognize advanced training when I see it. And I know when something unusual is being planned. Marcus remained silent, waiting to see where this conversation was leading. The question is, Hartwell continued, are you part of the solution or part of the problem? What do you mean? Hartwell leaned forward slightly. We know there's a credible threat to tomorrow's ceremony. We also know that someone has been feeding information to the people making the threat. What we don't know is whether you're here to stop them or to help them. Marcus felt a chill run through him. If Hartwell was suspicious of him, it meant their operational security had serious gaps. Colonel, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Has there? Hartwell's voice remained friendly, but his eyes had grown hard. A former SAS sniper suddenly appears as a Queen's Guard just months before a major security event. Someone with your skills doesn't take a ceremonial position unless there's a very good reason. The conversation was spinning out of control. Marcus realized he had 2 choices: maintain his cover and risk being identified as a threat, or trust Hartwell with enough truth to prevent a potentially dangerous misunderstanding. You're right that I have specialized training, Marcus said slowly. And you're right that my assignment here isn't entirely ceremonial. But I'm working to prevent problems, not create them. Hartwell studied him for a long moment. Prove it. Marcus made a decision that went against every security protocol he had been taught. There's a group of former contractors planning to disrupt tomorrow's ceremony. We have identification on 3 suspects, but we believe there are more. Someone with access to security briefings has been feeding them information. We? Hartwell asked. Palace security. Intelligence services. People who want tomorrow to go smoothly. Hartwell was quiet for nearly a minute, apparently weighing Marcus's words. Finally, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small device that looked like a mobile phone. Electronic countermeasures, he explained, activating it. Now we can speak freely. I'm not retired, Thompson. I'm working for the same people you are, just from a different angle. Marcus felt his world shift slightly. You're part of the operation, yes. My job was to identify you and assess whether you could be trusted with additional information. Congratulations, you passed. What additional information? Hartwell's expression grew grim. The threat is bigger than you've been told. We're not dealing with 3 or 4 disgruntled contractors. We're dealing with a coordinated group of 15 people, including 2 currently serving military personnel. Marcus felt his blood run cold. Serving personnel? 1 Army, 1 RAF. Both with access to current security protocols and inside knowledge of tomorrow's arrangements. They don't know we've identified them yet, but they've been feeding information to the contractors for weeks. This changed everything. If serving military personnel were involved, it meant the threat had access to real-time intelligence, current communication codes, and detailed knowledge of response procedures. Why wasn't I told this before? Because we needed to be absolutely certain you weren't part of it, Hartwell replied. Your background made you a perfect candidate to be either the solution or the problem. We had to be sure which. Marcus thought about the careful way Mitchell had briefed him, the limited information he had been given, and the constant sense that he wasn't getting the full picture. It had all been an elaborate test of his loyalty and intentions. What's the real plan for tomorrow? Marcus asked. Hartwell pulled out a tablet and showed Marcus a detailed map of the palace grounds and surrounding area. They're planning a 3-stage operation. First, a distraction event in St. James's Park to draw security resources away from the palace. Second, a direct assault on the ceremonial formation during the arrival ceremony. Third, an extraction plan using knowledge of our response protocols to escape before we can react. Marcus studied the map, noting positions and timing that would require inside knowledge to execute effectively. How do we stop it? That's where your skills become essential, Hartwell explained. We can't simply arrest them before the event. We don't have enough evidence, and the serving personnel would claim they were conducting legitimate security assessments. We need to catch them in the act, which means letting them start the operation. Exactly. But we'll be ready. You'll be positioned to provide overwatch on the ceremonial area. I'll be coordinating the response to the distraction event, and we'll have teams in place to handle the extraction routes. Marcus realized the elegant complexity of the plan. And if something goes wrong, then people die, and international relations suffer a serious setback, Hartwell said bluntly. which is why we need someone with your capabilities in position. They spent the next hour going over details, communication protocols, and contingency plans. Marcus learned that the operation involved resources from multiple intelligence services, specialized police units, and military personnel who had been carefully vetted for loyalty. As they prepared to leave, Hartwell handed Marcus a small communication device. Tomorrow, you'll receive instructions through this. It's encrypted and frequency hopping, so our compromised colleagues won't be able to intercept it. Walking back to his quarters, Marcus felt the familiar weight of impending action. But this was different from his SAS operations. Then, he had been working with teams he knew and trusted against enemies who were clearly defined. Tomorrow, he would be operating in a situation where allies and enemies might look identical until the moment they revealed their true intentions. The next morning dawned clear and bright, perfect weather for the state visit. Marcus went through his usual routine of preparing his uniform, but this time he also checked the specialized equipment he would need for his real mission. A modified communication earpiece, nearly invisible body armor, and access credentials for areas of the palace that didn't officially exist. The ceremonial preparations began before dawn. Marcus took his assigned position in the formation, standing at attention with the other guards while dignitaries and officials made their final arrangements. To anyone watching, he was simply another red-coated figure in the traditional pageantry of British state occasions. But Marcus's attention was focused on details others couldn't see. He noted the positions of plainclothes security personnel, identified potential vantage points for surveillance or attack, and memorized the faces of everyone with access to the restricted areas. 2 hours before the ceremony, he received his first message on Hartwell's device. Distraction team moving into position. 3 suspects confirmed in St. James's Park. An hour later, inside personnel have access communication systems. They believe they're monitoring our real frequencies. Marcus smiled slightly at that. If the compromised military personnel thought they were intercepting genuine security communications, they would be confident in their intelligence advantage. What they didn't know was that all of their information was being carefully controlled to serve the operational plan. 30 minutes before the ceremony, primary assault team identified. For personnel with concealed weapons approaching from north entrance. Marcus felt his breathing slow and his awareness sharpen. These were the familiar sensations that preceded action, the mental transition from observer to operator that had kept him alive through dozens of dangerous situations. As the first motorcade arrived and crowds cheered, Marcus received a final message. Overwatch position Alpha ready. Your show now. The ceremony began with traditional precision. Military bands played, officials took their positions, and the carefully choreographed pageantry of British state occasions unfolded exactly as it had for centuries. But beneath the surface, a very different drama was about to begin. Marcus spotted the first sign of trouble when one of the identified assault team members moved out of position, heading toward an area that should have been restricted. The man's movement was subtle, professional, and would have been invisible to anyone not specifically watching for it. Through his earpiece, Marcus heard Hartwell's voice. Distraction event initiating in 3 minutes. Prepare for main assault. As if on cue, shouts and commotion erupted from the direction of St. James's Park. Marcus could see security personnel responding exactly as they were supposed to, rushing toward what appeared to be a serious incident involving weapons and explosives. But Marcus knew the real threat was approaching from the opposite direction. The assault team had used the distraction perfectly, moving into position while attention was focused elsewhere. Marcus could see them now, for figures in dark clothing moving with military precision toward the ceremonial formation. It was time to transition from ceremonial guard to special operations sniper. Marcus stepped out of formation and moved quickly toward the concealed access point that would take him to his overwatch position. In 60 seconds, he would either prevent a catastrophe or watch helplessly as months of planning unraveled in violence and chaos. Everything he had learned in 12 years of SAS operations was about to be tested in the most public and high-stakes environment imaginable. Marcus moved through the palace's hidden corridors with practiced silence. The sounds of the ceremony echoed faintly through the walls, military bands, official announcements, and the murmur of thousands of spectators. But his focus was entirely on reaching the overwatch position before the assault team struck. The concealed staircase led to a room that officially didn't exist, built into the palace architecture decades ago for exactly this kind of situation. Marcus opened the specially designed window that provided an unobstructed view of the ceremonial area while remaining invisible from below. His rifle was waiting, a precision instrument that had been zeroed and calibrated by palace armorers who understood the critical importance of absolute accuracy. Marcus checked the weapon with the automatic efficiency of thousands of hours of training, his hands moving through familiar motions while his eyes assessed the tactical situation below. Through his earpiece, Hartwell's voice provided updates. Distraction team has initiated explosive devices in the park. Emergency response units are fully engaged. Primary assault team is 60 seconds from target. Marcus could see them now through his scope, four figures moving through the crowd with practiced skill. They had timed their approach perfectly, using the chaos from the park incident to mask their final positioning. To the thousands of spectators, they looked like additional security personnel responding to the crisis. But Marcus recognized the signs that distinguished them from legitimate security. Their movement patterns were wrong, their equipment placement was tactical rather than protective, and, most importantly, they were converging on the ceremonial formation instead of establishing a defensive perimeter. Targets acquired. Marcus reported quietly into his communication device. 4 assault personnel, approximately 30 seconds from weapons range. Confirmed, Hartwell responded. You are authorized to engage on your judgment. Repeat, you have authorization to engage when necessary. Marcus felt the familiar calm that preceded action. His breathing slowed, his heart rate stabilized, and the world narrowed to the precise relationship between his rifle, the targets below, and the calculations required to stop them. The first assault team member reached into his jacket. Marcus made his decision. The suppressed rifle made barely a whisper as the first shot found its target. The man collapsed instantly, his weapon falling harmlessly to the ground. Spectators nearby assumed he had suffered some kind of medical emergency, heart attack, perhaps, or exhaustion from the excitement. The second target reacted with professional instincts, immediately seeking cover while reaching for his concealed weapon. But Marcus was already adjusting his aim, compensating for the man's movement, and calculating the precise shot placement that would neutralize the threat without endangering innocent bystanders. The second shot was as precise as the first. The target went down cleanly, his weapon still holstered. The remaining 2 assault team members realized they were under attack, but they couldn't identify the source. From their ground-level perspective, their colleagues had simply collapsed without warning. They began moving more aggressively toward their target, knowing their operation was compromised. Marcus tracked the third target through his scope, waiting for a clear shot that wouldn't risk hitting civilians. The man was using the crowd as cover, moving erratically to make himself a difficult target. Professional training was evident in every movement. The shot came when the target paused for a split second to assess his approach route. Marcus took it, and the man crumpled to the ground behind a ceremonial barrier. 1 target remained, and he was now close enough to the official party to create a hostage situation if he wasn't stopped immediately. Through his earpiece, Marcus heard urgent communications. Final target is 15 meters from primary protection zone. All units, final target is critical threat level. Marcus could see the last assault team member clearly now. The man had abandoned stealth and was moving directly toward the dignitaries, his hand inside his jacket reaching for what was undoubtedly a weapon. The shot had to be perfect, too high, and it might miss entirely, allowing the target to complete his mission. Too low, and it risked hitting innocent people who were unaware of the danger. The angle was difficult, the distance was at the edge of precision range, and there would be no second chance. Marcus controlled his breathing, calculated wind and distance, and squeezed the trigger with the same precision that had made him one of the most effective snipers in SAS history. The final target dropped 10 meters from the ceremonial formation. To the officials and dignitaries, it appeared that a spectator had collapsed from excitement or medical issues. Security personnel moved quickly to provide assistance, maintaining the illusion that nothing extraordinary had happened. All targets neutralized, Marcus reported into his communication device. Outstanding work. Hartwell's voice came back immediately. Medical teams are responding to treat the targets as apparent medical emergencies. Crowd control is maintaining normal ceremony protocols. Marcus began breaking down his position, securing the rifle, and preparing to resume his cover as a ceremonial guard. But, through his earpiece, he heard something that made him pause. Secondary concern. Hartwell's voice was tense. We have 2 more suspects who weren't part of the primary assault team. They appear to be moving toward the palace interior. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. The assault on the ceremony had been a diversion for something else entirely. Interior targets? Marcus asked quietly. Confirmed. 2 suspects with inside knowledge are attempting to access restricted palace areas. Possible assassination attempt on visiting dignitaries who are scheduled to move inside for private meetings after the ceremony. Marcus realized the elegant complexity of the enemy plan. The assault on the ceremony had been designed to draw all security attention outward, leaving the interior of the palace vulnerable to a secondary team with inside knowledge and legitimate access credentials. I can intercept, Marcus said, already moving toward the interior corridors. Negative, Hartwell replied. You need to resume your ceremonial position to maintain cover. We have other assets responding. But Marcus could hear something in Hartwell's voice that suggested the other assets might not be sufficient. If the interior threat involved people with legitimate access, it would be nearly impossible to identify them until they acted. Marcus made another decision that went against explicit orders. I'm moving to intercept interior targets. He left his overwatch position and moved quickly through the palace's hidden passages toward the areas where visiting dignitaries would be taken for private meetings. His ceremonial uniform would actually be an advantage here. Anyone seeing him would assume he was providing official escort duties. The private meeting rooms were located in the palace's historic wing, areas where centuries of British history had been made. Marcus approached carefully, using his knowledge of the building's layout to remain undetected. He heard voices before he saw the speakers, 2 men discussing timing and positioning in the professional shorthand of military personnel. Marcus positioned himself to observe without being seen. The 2 suspects were indeed wearing legitimate credentials that would allow them access to restricted areas. One was an army uniform, the other wore the identification of palace maintenance staff. They were examining architectural plans and discussing entry points to the room where world leaders would be meeting in less than an hour. Marcus realized they weren't planning a direct assault. They were placing surveillance equipment and what appeared to be explosive devices in locations that would allow them to monitor and potentially eliminate the visiting dignitaries during their private discussions. This was far more sophisticated than a simple attack on the ceremony. It was a precisely planned operation designed to eliminate multiple world leaders while making it appear to be a tragic accident or technical failure. Marcus had no backup, no direct communication with support teams, and no official authorization for what he was about to do. But he also had no choice. He approached the 2 men with the confident stride of a guard performing official duties. Gentlemen, I need to see your current authorization for access to this area, he said in the authoritative tone that came naturally from years of military service. The army officer turned toward him with professional courtesy. Of course, we're conducting final security sweeps before the diplomatic meetings. He began reaching for his credentials, but the maintenance worker reacted differently. His hand moved toward a concealed weapon with the speed of someone expecting trouble. Marcus struck first, using hand-to-hand combat techniques that were designed to neutralize threats quickly and silently. The maintenance worker went down instantly, his weapon skittering across the floor. The army officer reacted with trained instincts, but Marcus was ready. A precise blow to the solar plexus doubled the man over, and a follow-up strike rendered him unconscious. Both men were down, but Marcus knew this was only the beginning of a larger problem. He quickly searched their equipment and found sophisticated surveillance devices, remote detonation controls, and enough explosive material to level half the historic wing of the palace. Through his communication device, he called for immediate support. Interior threats neutralized, but we have a major problem. These weren't assassination attempts. They were planning to destroy the entire diplomatic meeting. Hartwell's response was immediate. Bomb disposal teams are en route. Secure the area and maintain position. Marcus spent the next 30 minutes working with explosive ordnance specialists to identify and neutralized devices that had been placed throughout the palace's historic wing. The sophistication of the operation was staggering: months of planning, inside knowledge, and resources that suggested state-level backing. As the immediate crisis passed, Marcus found himself in the surreal position of returning to ceremonial duties while investigators worked to understand the full scope of what had been prevented. The state visit continued exactly as planned. World leaders held their private meetings in complete security, unaware that they had come within minutes of a catastrophic attack. The public ceremony concluded with traditional pageantry, and thousands of spectators went home with photos and memories of British tradition at its finest. But Marcus knew that beneath the surface, something fundamental had changed. The threats facing modern democracies were becoming more sophisticated, more coordinated, and more dangerous than traditional security measures could handle. 3 weeks later, Marcus received an official summons to meet with his superiors. He expected debriefing sessions, performance evaluations, and possibly disciplinary action for exceeding his authorized role during the crisis. Instead, he found himself in a conference room with Mitchell, Hartwell, and several officials he didn't recognize. "Thompson," Mitchell began, "your performance during the state visit was exceptional. You identified and neutralized threats that could have resulted in a major international catastrophe." "I was just doing my job, ma'am." "That's exactly the problem," Hartwell interjected with a smile. "Your job was supposed to be ceremonial guard duty with occasional overwatch responsibilities. Instead, you single-handedly prevented what could have been the most significant security failure in palace history." One of the unknown officials leaned forward. "We're offering you a new position, Thompson. Officially, you'll remain a member of the Queen's Guard. Unofficially, you'll be part of a specialized team that handles threats requiring your particular skills." Marcus considered the offer. He had come to the palace seeking peace from the world of dangerous operations and life-or-death decisions. But the events of recent weeks had proven that such threats would find him regardless of what uniform he wore. "What kind of team?" he asked. "The kind that prevents disasters before they become public knowledge," Mitchell replied. "The kind that protects democracy by stopping threats that conventional security can't handle." Marcus thought about his fallen partner in Yemen, about the tourists who trusted that their government could keep them safe, and about the world leaders who had come within minutes of assassination without ever knowing it. "When do I start?" 6 months later, Marcus was still standing guard at Buckingham Palace, still wearing the traditional red uniform that tourists loved to photograph. But now he also carried equipment and knowledge that most people couldn't imagine, and his real mission extended far beyond ceremonial duties. The other guards still knew him as a decent shot who kept to himself. Morrison still tried to convince him to join social activities, and Sergeant Williams still assigned him to routine duties without any indication of his true role. But Marcus had found his place in a world that required both tradition and innovation, where ancient ceremonies provided cover for modern security operations, and where the skills he had learned in special forces could serve his country in ways he had never expected. Sometimes, while standing at attention during the changing of the guard, Marcus would spot faces in the crowd that seemed too interested in details that tourists shouldn't notice. When that happened, he would file the information away and trust that somewhere in London, people like Hartwell and Mitchell were paying attention. The transition from special forces to civilian life hadn't been what he expected. Instead of leaving his old skills behind, he had found a way to use them in service of something larger than any single mission or operation. As tourists continued to snap photos and children waved from behind the palace gates, Marcus stood guard over more than they knew, protecting not just tradition and ceremony, but the delicate balance that allowed democracy to function in an increasingly dangerous world. The Royal Guard who had been mocked at the shooting range had indeed been a former SAS sniper. But, more than that, he had become something new, a guardian who could function equally well in the worlds of ancient tradition and modern warfare, ensuring that both could continue to exist.